Hi, my name is Brent, and let me tell you about my best day. So, growing up for me, it was me and my sister. We lived with my grandmother for most of my early life. It was my sister and I, my grandma, my grandfather was there some of the time, and some of the time not. My dad wasn't around. My mom wasn't really around. She was just kind of off trying to really find herself and find her path. So she didn't really have I guess, the time or space in her life for her kids. Growing up, we lived in Dallas in a little town. We lived in Oak Cliff, so growing up in Oak Cliff, it was a poor side of town, and so with us growing up, you don't think about that when you're a kid. You just think, oh, this is just life. And now, like, as an adult looking back, I'm like, man, like, we were struggling. So we moved around a lot, just not having a lot of money. Sometimes we lived in motels. Sometimes we would live with other family members. Sometimes we go from this family member to this family member. But I mean, just really, with no matter what was going on, my grandma, she was there, and she was our constant, and she made sure we had food on the table. She made sure we had clean clothes on our back. She made sure that we got to school. We didn't really go to church much, just wasn't really something that we did. Not even like the Easter and Christmas Christian. I knew about God. I knew that God was real, just didn't really have a relationship with him. And growing up, even like my aunts and my uncles, they all lived pretty far from us. And I had one aunt in particular who, her husband was a military guy, and so they moved around a lot, but they were in Germany and Fort Hood. And whenever they would come to visit, for some reason I had this real special attachment and relationship to this aunt. And whenever they would come, it would be the happiest time of my life. When they would leave, I would literally just cry and bawl my eyes out. I didn't really know why, but at probably around the age of 11, my aunt had decided that she was going to move back to town and just really be there, for my grandmother, and kind of help her out and whatnot. So she was moving all of her stuff, moved her kids up. We were going to school together, and the very day that she gets there, it's her first day to be in town. She tells my grandmother, I'm here to stay, not leaving anymore. And then that night, my grandmother passes. Up until this point, my grandma had been the only real constant in my life. She had been the only real mother figure and the only constant love that I had experienced in my life. And so with her being gone, I felt lost. So right after this, like I said, my aunt, she moved to town, and her and my mom, they decided they were going to get a house together and try to support each other and be there for each other. And so my aunt and her two kids, and my mom and me and my sister, we moved into a house. And now this is the aunt I was talking about earlier. And so she began to take us to church. This was the first time that I had experienced church in this way, and we were going every week. And so I was hearing a lot about God, and we were in children's church and all these things. And so a couple of years passed by, and we're going to church, and I actually get the opportunity to go to a private Christian school. The church we were attending, they had a small Christian school there, and just honestly, I think with the graciousness of our pastor and with my aunt making money stretch, me and my sister were able to attend along with my cousins, and this was 8th grade year for me. And while we were there, again, still didn't have a lot of money. My aunt's pretty much trying to raise the four of us. At this point, my mom's she's still trying to find her own path. And so my aunt has become a mom to us. And so over the course of this 8th grade year, I just really felt like God drawn me to a personal relationship. And I had been in church for a couple of years now. When we would go, I would hear about God, but I never had that personal relationship. I never had that personal encounter. And then just over the course of this year, I just really began to feel God drawing me in. And that's when I really started getting serious about my relationship with God. So after that, after 8th grade year, I feel like I'm in the serious relationship with God now, and God's doing things in my life, and I'm loving church and loving this new relationship. And also at this time, I'm getting to live with my mom now for the first time, really, on our own. It's just us. But even having this relationship with God and this new joy, and peace that I feel, I go home and my mom's not in the same type of relationship that I'm in. She's still, even at this point, just living a lifestyle that's contrary to what my faith walk is. And so as I'm going to church on Sundays and I'm loving it and I'm praising God, as soon as church is over, I know that I have to go home. And so it's not the greatest place to go to when what you go home to is just completely the opposite of what you're being taught and what you're believing and what you feel, as a personal thing that God's done in your heart. God's given you joy and God's given you peace, and you go home and that's not exactly what you're being presented with. So it was a real struggle, and this is how this is how my faith walk goes through high school. I'm allowed to do a lot of things in church, and when I read my word, these things that I'm allowed to do are not the things I'm supposed to be doing, in the relationship with God, but those are the things that I'm presented with at home. And so it made my walk a little bit harder up until I leave to go to college, and then I'm out on my own. I don't know, maybe somebody will watch this and maybe my home life will sound similar to theirs, and maybe you'll be going through something like that, and you're trying to walk this journey of faith, and you go home to just a crazy lifestyle at home. It's really hard to hear, but the best thing that I can tell you is that God works in the hard times too. As many a times as I cried and asked God to rescue me from my situation, and I asked God to take me out of this situation, I even had a time where I talked to my aunt about it, and I bawled my eyes out, and I'm a teenage boy at this point, and I'm trying to be manly or whatever, and I'm crying like a baby, and my aunt, she has the opportunity to remove us from the situation, and she came and she told me, she said, I want to take you guys out of that situation. I want to have you out of that. And she said, she prayed about it, and she said that God told me that he has a plan. He has a plan for your life. And the things that you're going through right now, God's going to use for his plan. And as an adult right now, at 33 years old, I see why. I see why some things were allowed in my life. Not that God had those things happen to me, but I'm glad that God allowed me to go through those things, because they shaped me to be the man that I am today. They shaped my Christianity. They shaped the type of father that I am and the type of husband that I am today. God works even in the hard times. It's not just on the mountaintops and when everything's all great and joy is filled your life and it's all happiness. That's not the only time that God's working. But when you feel like you're in your lowest place and you feel like you're in the valley, I learned that God's working in those times too. So now, after going through everything I've gone through, God's blessed me. And where I am right now, I'm married. I have an awesome wife. I have 2 beautiful kids. Me and my wife, we've been married for, I think, 12 years now. And I'm a worship pastor at a church. And I've literally, by the grace of God, I've literally beat every statistic that would have been placed on my life, that was placed on my life growing up. When people said I was going to be something, and God's completely turned that around. And I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful for what God's done in my life, and I believe he'll do in your life too. So my name is Brent. Thank you for letting me tell you about my best day.